The United Nations troops push on in the cautious advance against the communists. An advance whose purpose, General Ridgway states, is not to seize ground, but to wipe out the enemy. The Chinese Red Army, fighting desperately in small isolated stands, prefers to give ground on wider fronts rather than join battle. And it's up to the infantry to clear out the pockets of die-hard communists. With the enemy falling back to the Han River, United Nations commanders had expected that the Reds would make their stand there. But under a steady, withering barrage, GIs are able to cross the river and establish a beachhead. Within 2 hours, a pontoon bridge spans the Han, and United Nations troops and equipment pour across toward the capital city of Seoul. Moments later, Chinese communists, prisoners, are being marched to the rear. Seoul, too, falls into United Nations hands, this time not as a prime military target, but as the result of the clean United Nations sweep up the Korean peninsula. The once proud capital of the Korean Republic is a mass of ruins whose able-bodied men have been carried off to forced service in North Korea. Children and the aged are left to see the liberation of their city. Above Seoul, mud and the Marines take over. For once, the Marines almost meet their match as spring thaws slow down the United Nations push. The Marines came back into action only recently from the Hungnam beachhead. Despite obstacles, United Nations forces drive on to the 38th parallel, border of North Korea. Santiago, Chile, plays host to ECOSOC, the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Delegates from 18 nations arrive by air for the first major UN meeting in South America. Their purpose is to discuss underlying reasons for world ills and to adopt methods for treating them. UN Secretary General Trygve Lie, on hand for the 6-week conference, first goes into preliminary meetings with Chile's energetic president, Gabriel González Videla, a recent visitor to the U.S., and Foreign Secretary Hernan Santa Cruz. It's now late summer here below the equator. The session opens in the Chilean Congress building in Santiago, normally the home of Chile's popularly elected parliament. Pointing up the Economic and Social Council's long-term objectives, Secretary Lie urges the delegates to redouble their efforts toward improving living and working conditions around the world. Chile's Santa Cruz ECOSOC president has early difficulties with communist delegates, but the council is seeking world agreement on basic human problems, and the smallest step toward agreement counts as progress.
Madrid turns out its fullest pomp as Spain celebrates the resumption of normal diplomatic relations with the United States. New U.S. Ambassador to Spain, Stanton Griffiths, in a cortege of royal coaches and Moorish guards, rides to the National Palace to present his credentials to Generalissimo Francisco Franco. Other United Nations countries have also sent ambassadors in line with repeal of a 5-year-old UN resolution against Franco's government. At the National Palace, Griffiths, a New York businessman who was formerly ambassador to Argentina and Poland, meets members of the Spanish government. Then Mr. Griffiths introduces his staff to General Franco, ending the post-war gap in Spanish-American relations. As America looks to its defenses, New York City's Civil Defense Program gets underway. Volunteers recruited for the Medical Emergency Division assemble to take the oath of loyalty from Secretary of Defense George Marshall. These first 700 civil defense aides, after thorough training, will work with New York's police and fire departments and will be ready for any emergency. Secretary Marshall says that New York will serve as a model for other cities in developing the nation's volunteer defense program. 1 million out of the city's 8 million people are expected to volunteer for duty as our country seeks 20 million Americans to man its civil defenses. In Washington, a surprise visit by President Truman, who bears with him a gavel carved of wood used in building the White House in 1817, honors Vice President Alben W. Barkley. The occasion marks Mr. Barkley's 38th year of continuous service in both houses of Congress, first as a congressman, then as senator. Now Vice President of the United States and President of the Senate, Alben W. Barkley of Kentucky has been in Congress longer than any other man in history.
Introduces a new jet attack bomber. Australian Premier Menzies is on hand to name the plane the Canberra after his country's capital. Christened with Australian champagne, the Canberra joins the Royal Air Force at once. A pair of Rolls-Royce turbojet Avons supply her power, and her speed is announced as 600 miles an hour, but most other data is secret. She's ready to fly to America for inspection by U.S. Air Force officers. And now the Canberra heads out to race the sun across the Atlantic. She arrives over Washington after racing with the sun from Britain to Newfoundland, a latitude in which the sun's speed is the same as the Canberra's. Because headwinds slowed the Superjet, the sun won the race by 72 minutes and continued on its course. But the Canberra nevertheless set a new Atlantic record of 4 hours and 42 minutes. The plane's three-man crew is congratulated by U.S. officials as the Canberra, a triumph of British aircraft engineering, is welcomed by America. A unique machine for conditioning jet plane pilots for bailing out at supersonic speeds is demonstrated at William Air Force Base in Chandler, Arizona. Here, the seat, a duplicate of a real jet plane cockpit, will slide on rails up a metal track. Just as in flight, the propulsion force used to throw the seat free of the plane is produced by the powder charge of a 37mm shell. The pilot himself will set it off. When the propulsion force is dissipated, the seat comes to a halt on a ratchet and is lowered automatically. As under actual emergency conditions, the airman is subject to a pull of 14 times gravity and shoots upward at 60 miles per hour. The Air Force overlooks no precaution for safety. Palo Alto, California, the world's first jet helicopter is unveiled by its inventor, youthful Stanley Hiller, Jr. The essence of simplicity, the helicopter is powered by two small jet engines which weigh only 11 pounds each and have no moving parts. In a matter of minutes, they can be attached to the tips of the rotors. The plane is practically foolproof and fuel-proof. It runs on almost anything that burns: gasoline, kerosene, diesel fuel, or even castor oil. The plane flies with only two controls and has fewer gadgets than the average automobile. Mr. Hiller plans an inexpensive two-passenger commuter model, which, like this, will remain stable even with no hands on the controls. For the present, however, production must be exclusively for the armed forces.
In a wood near Rome, Countess Renate Rivetta picks up materials, leaves, grasses, and flowers for a kind of art which she has developed in an unusual way. The Countess, trained as a sculptress and painter, uses the natural shapes of leaves without altering or cutting them. Her finished pictures, known technically as collage, are unique and original. The first exhibit of her leaf paintings, held in Rome, shows the flexibility and range of her work. This dancing couple is composed entirely of leaves in their natural shape. Eucalyptus leaves make a concert duo. St. Francis of Assisi feeds a flock of leaf birds. The Three Wise Men. Joseph and Mary. Even the Countess's friends are subjects for her fresh and witty Leith paintings.
In Milan, Italy, America's Dick Button meets Italian admirers as he enters the World Figure Skating Championships. Dick is after his 4th world title, skating against experts from all over Europe. Dick glides through the intricate routines required by the rules and adds some equally difficult figures of his own. An amazed international crowd sees the 21-year-old Harvard student from Englewood, New Jersey, surpass his opposition from 6 nations. By the final day of competition, Dick has run up the greatest lead of points ever compiled in the event. After a perfect display of grace and control, America's Dick Button makes it 4 world championships in a row. The Philadelphia Phillies, who last year captured the National League Baseball title under the guidance of manager Eddie Sawyer, are training for another championship battle. Here at Clearwater, Florida, they have many regulars on hand. Pitcher Emery Church, with 8 victories last year, hopes to pass that mark this season. The coaching staff plans to build another winning combination around such stars as Robin Roberts, who in 1950 pitched 20 winners, first baseman Eddie Waitkus, and the great relief pitcher Jim Constanti. Last year, this top-notch talent put the Phils on top of their league and carried them into the 1950 World Series against the American League's New York Yankees. In last year's series, first for the Phils in 35 years, Yankee manager Stengel and Phillies manager Sawyer saw the Yanks take the first game 1-0. In the second game, Allie Reynolds, who had won 2 series games for the Yanks in '49, is hit for a single by the Phils' Mike Goliat. Eddie Waitkus follows up with a hit that hops over Coleman's head into right field. Goliat goes to third, and the Phillies get their big chance. Ashburn sends out a long fly, and the Phillies score as Goliat comes home after the catch. The game goes into extra innings, tied 1-1. In the 10th, Joe DiMaggio comes to bat for the Yanks. He connects for his first hit of the series, and what a hit into the upper deck in left center field. It's Jolton Joe's 7th World Series home run, and it spells victory for the Yanks 2-1. The Yankees go on to take the next 2 games for a 4-0 series sweep and some permissible boasting in this year's spring training. The place is Phoenix, Arizona. Loosening up winter kinks, big pinch hitter John Mize outpulls brother infielders Phil Rizzuto and Jerry Coleman. With Rizzuto is heavy-hitting catcher Yogi Berra. Ed Lopat, an 18-game winner last year, finds his arm good as new, while DiMaggio, who announced this may be his last season, looks on. Tossing them in is Vic Raschi with 21 pitching victories to his credit in 1950, followed by Allie Reynolds, who chalked up 16. 320 hitter Hank Bauer blasts one out with DiMaggio right at his heels. Will the Yanks do it again this year? Manager Casey Stengel, out for his 3rd straight championship, looks mighty optimistic.
The United Confederate Veterans meeting in 1949 at Little Rock, Arkansas, saluted, as did the nation, their commander, General James W. Moore. Now, General Moore, at 99, follows the heroic dead of the South to a soldier's grave in Selma, Alabama, as the last tiny handful of the boys in gray prepares for the final Confederate reunion in Norfolk, Virginia. Color Guards from Virginia Military Institute, of which the general was the oldest graduate, together with relatives, friends, and neighbors, pay final tribute to the gallant soldier who ran away from school at the age of 13 to join the Confederate cavalry. The banner for which General Moore fought is presented to his daughter as an old soldier is laid to rest. 176 years ago, in two Massachusetts villages just a few miles from Boston, a handful of farmers and tradespeople, their patience with the oppressive acts of a government 3,000 miles away exhausted, struck the first militant blow of the American Revolution. The story of Lexington and Concord begins in Boston, capital city of New England. From Boston on the night of April 18, 1775, 700 British soldiers crossed the Charles River and marched inland to seize the arms hidden at Concord by the Provincial Congress. At Lexington Green, patriots blocked their line of march. After a skirmish, the British went on to Concord, and amazingly, to defeat. All-night rides by Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott had warned the country folk of the Redcoats' approach. Patriot militiamen seized their muskets and hurried to rallying places. At this house in Lexington, John Hancock and Samuel Adams, two eminent patriot leaders, were roused by Revere. On the quiet Lexington Green, American militiamen had recently been holding military drills. Now at Buckman Tavern, just off the green, they assembled during early morning of April 19, 1775, to await the British. Two lines of Minutemen, numbering about 70 under Captain John Parker, refused to disperse and let the 400 British pass. No one knows for certain whether Redcoat or Minuteman fired first, but when the firing ended 15 or 20 minutes later, 8 Americans were dead and 10 wounded, and a war had begun. Here the Minutemen had made their stand. The words attributed to Captain Parker expressed the spirit of that morning. Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. Captain Parker, rifle in hand, today dominates Lexington Green, while a short distance away is the belfry, formerly on the green itself, from which the alarm was sounded. To the Harrington House, just north of the green, at the height of battle, came Jonathan Harrington, first to be mortally wounded, to die on the steps of his home at the feet of his wife. Oh, what a glorious day this is, the radical Sam Adams, hearing the muskets of Lexington, had exclaimed. The battle was joined, but not until the British reached Concord, 5 miles away, could patriots have believed how gloriously the day would end. At the east approach of the Old North Bridge, a group of these 300 or 400 provincials had gathered, while British troops in separate detachments were destroying provincial supplies throughout Concord. The Minutemen defied the Redcoats' warning shots and marched on the bridge in their first offensive action of the war. By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled, here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. From the old manse, Reverend William Emerson, grandfather of Ralph Waldo, watched the Concord fighting. Here later, Nathaniel Hawthorne lived and wrote. Across the street, Elisha Jones had stored supplies for the Minutemen. As Jones stood here, a bullet from the battle hit the house beside him. The hole is still there. Major Buttrick, the American commander at North Bridge, lived a moment's walk from the spot where he led the attack. In 5 minutes here, a chain of events reaching into our lives today began. Though few of these Americans sought it yet, independence was now inevitable. By noon, the British left Concord and, under continual fire, retreated to Boston. They lost 273, the Minutemen 93. Bitter years lay ahead, but men with the will to be free had struck out for freedom.